Hello, it's Module 10. We're going to talk about BibFrame, and these are the pre-class slides for this topic. My agenda today is just do a little bit of a review and put BibFrame into context and just introduce the idea of BibFrame. So, what is LC-Mark? We talked about this a few weeks ago, and I had that chart, and it had the analogy of LC-Mark being like a wine bottle. So what was that wine bottle? Well, the chart, a data structure. Next week, we're going to learn some different data structures for different kinds of library materials. But right now, just think of Mark as a structure in which you put content. So here's a little bit of a view of the structure. Remember those different field labels, 100, 110, etc. 100 is the main entry, the personal name. The 245 field we talked a lot about is the title statement. These are structures. How we fill in that structure is another story, and that relates to RDA, which, as you might recall from last time, is a data content standard. It's how we fill in the fields. LC-Mark is the description record, and it's separate from the holdings record. Each library has a separate record that is bound to the description for that particular time. But separate. Bound to it, but separate. Related to it, but separate. About 13 years ago, a man named Roy Tennant, who now works for OCLC and still writes a lot for the Library Journal and American Libraries about technology in libraries, wrote a pretty provocative article that said, "Mark must die." It took a long time for it to die, and it's still dying, um, but it is definitely going through not just a transformation, but a replacement. And Tennant had a number of different reasons for wanting Mark to. Um, the main reason was that it was too limited for digital use because it was too inflexible. We bend the rules of the data structure all the time by putting in things that aren't really a title, that aren't that don't really explain what materials are, although RDA is getting a little bit better about that. But the field labels just don't really add up. The Mark is too bound up with the book as a physical object. We still have measurements for the size of the book. Does that really make any sense in today's world? We have lots of different records for the same content. If you go on WorldCat, you can see multiples records for the exact same book with the same publisher, with the same author, with the same title. Many different forms of mark. there's actually at least three different standards in the United States. Regular LC Mark, Mark 21, Mark XML, and then there are different standards for different languages. So Tennant wrote out if he could design something perfect that would replace Mark, it would be versatile, it would be easy to apply in other contexts. He uses the word extensible. It would be open and connected to the, especially to the web. It would be transparent. A lot, I think I mentioned this a few weeks ago, a lot of what we put into the MARC record is not searchable. Those book dimensions, for instance, we can't search for all the, 21 centimeter books in our collection. There should be a low threshold for entry into the system. Being able to understand how to fill in those fields and what those fields stand for should be easier than it is. But at the same time, it should have a high ceiling for complexity. You should be able to make very complex or describe very complex materials with it. It should be cooperatively managed across both institutions and across countries, etc. It should be modular. And we'll see when we come to BibFrame that it actually is, that replacement at least is modular. I've reread the article and I still don't quite understand what Tennant was talking about with hierarchy. But he thought it should be very granular. You should be able to, again, sort of express that complexity in ways where things could be easily combined. And graceful at handling of failed searches. When we talk about library catalog interfaces in a couple of weeks, we'll discuss the fact that a lot of catalogs still have a lot of failed searches. And that is because we have the title locked up in the title field. We have the author locked up in the author field. And interfaces make up for that. Discovery layers make up for that. But there's still information locked so deeply in there that when we type in wrong information like the spelling of someone's last name, it doesn't come back and say, oh, did you mean XB? Which is what Google does for us, right? So one of the replacements, sort of around the same time that Tennant was talking, we talked about these Ferber entities that we discussed last week. What were those? There were 4 of them. Work, expression, manifestation, and item. Look those back up if you don't know what the differences were there. Ferber supports a number of user tasks, identifying that a resource exists, finding out where it is, selecting it, and ultimately obtaining it in some way, either as an electronic resource or as a physical item. BibFrame is related to the semantic web. So BibFrame has been proposed as a replacement for MARC. And this is moving rather quickly. A few of the slides that I'll show in class do not, when I went out to make sure that the site still looked that way, it didn't look that way. It was much more complicated. There was much more material there. But anyway, BibFrame is related to the semantic web. Some of you may know what that is, but here's the definition from our friend. So here's that semantic web definition from Wikipedia. It's an extension of the web. It utilizes standards. Most fundamentally, the main standard is the resource description framework. We're definitely going to be talking more about that in class. According to the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, the semantic web provides a common framework that allows data to be shared and reused across different applications, within an enterprise, and also across community boundaries. So here's your introduction to BibFrame. See you in class.